The Bruins respond with a dominant win over Boston University. Still too many turnovers for my liking, though.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Locked On UCLA Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. Thanks for making this show your first listen each and every day. It's free where we get your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for your support. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season off with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Where we get started today is UCLA's dominant win over the Terriers of Boston University. This is a Bruins team that came in angry. They were basically manhandled in that game against New Mexico over the weekend in Nevada. And apparently anytime UCLA in the modern era plays a game in the state of Nevada, mostly in Las Vegas, even the last time it was in Henderson, the Bruins don't seem to play well, whenever it is. This time, UCLA against Boston University, who was, according to the broadcast, playing without two starters, UCLA held them to 40 points and scored 71 points, beating them by 31. There's a long stretch where UCLA did not score. UCLA missed 9 of their last 10 shots, so maybe they could have put up 80. Still some things I have some qualms about the offense, but the defense was there when it comes to forcing turnovers. UCLA forced 28 turnovers. They're up 30 with a minute left, and Cronin's got this team diving with starters on the floor for basketballs, loose balls on the floor, hustle plays, 50-50s, deflections, everything, and the Bruins are playing their guts out. So the intensity of it is there. The execution, the flair I thought this team would have is just not there. Other than the Adai Mara dunk, there wasn't and maybe the Lazar Stefanovic dunk. I'm not sure what were the big super plays in this game with the UCLA team that shot 40% from the field barely and 23% from three, 5 of 22. Another god-awful day from downtown. The last two games, UCLA is a combined 10 for 45, if I've done my quick math from downtown. So the shooting that is supposed to be there is not. The crisp execution is not there. Tonight, the Bruins played without Dylan Andrews. He was held out day-to-day with a groin. And then we saw, I thought shockingly, a Stefanovic in the starting lineup. I think what that means for Mick Cronin and for this UCLA team is he valued, without hearing any of his post-game comments, he values the ability to have a veteran presence. He's always going to trust Stefanovic, right? Maybe the upside isn't as high as a Trent Perry or Sebastian Mack, but he's already said he likes Mack coming off the bench and just bullying guys with his hard-nosed north and south play, getting to the paint, getting to the bucket, getting fouls called, hitting threes. So that means Mack, unless it desperately needs him in the starting lineup, they're going to give Sky Clark those starting 1 minutes. And then Perry, I'm not sure Cronin after last year wants to trust freshmen as quickly as he needed to last year. Perry's going to come off the bench, which means Stefanovic played the two. Okay, and then you had Johnson, Kobe Johnson, Daly Jr., and Bilodeau with Sky Clark, a unique starting 5 for the Bruins in this game, who actually ended up with, quite a few minutes together. And then we saw some runtime tonight from Dominic Harris, who still went 0 from 6 from downtown. That is alarming because Harris is somebody the Bruins need to get going. And maybe that's why he didn't see any minutes early on in the first two games, where I think it was said that he combined for 6 minutes in the first two games. A guy who was a top 3 shooter from downtown in the country last year. Closer to 50% than he was to 40%. Much better than any UCLA shooter from 3 last season. And he comes in so far with an offer, and he just needs to get the lid off the bucket. And yes, they were somewhat mop-up minutes, but this is a guy UCLA needs, I think, to get going and to get anywhere close to their goals, which would start and end with the Big Ten regular season championship, conference tournament championship. And for Cronin, what he wants and what he cares about for this UCLA program is a deep run into the tournament. Now, the Bruins struggled with turnovers early. They had 5 in the second half, 10 in the first half, and it was just looking ugly, right? Like terrible with their offensive execution. Now, the new guys and having to mix it all over in this starting lineup, the guys who were recruited to UCLA initially out of high school, none of them. You had a starting lineup filled with guys who made other stops around the country, 3 of which were former conference rivals: Bilodeau, Johnson, Stefanovic. And then you bring in Clark and Daly Jr. from across the country. This was the all-transfer starting 5. That is the new day and age for this college basketball, roster makeup. And, you lose a guy to the pros. You have Dylan Andrews, who's injured, still working his way back. This is a UCLA team that is built a little differently. What I did like was Sebastian Mack, who had 12 points in this game. I like the authority played with Kyle and Mara in minutes, just a little over 10 to 15 minutes. So those 25 minutes are being split by those 2 guys in a game where UCLA won by 31. Boston is a little smaller. And the thing I guess I've noticed is I wonder how much New Mexico's size, and not just like having a 6'10 guy, but going 6'9", 6'9 and a half, 6'10 up and down the court in their starting 5 for Rich Pitino's squad was an absolute mismatch for UCLA, where they just played like garbage against the Lobo. Like they turned it over and looked horrible. I think Cronin said after that game, you turn it over that many times, you're not going to beat a D2 team. Well, the Bruins beat a shorthanded Terrier squad by 31, only allowing 40 points in this game. Boston did not score a bucket in the last 4.5 minutes. 4.5 minutes. So the clamps were there. There were some missed open shots by Boston going up and down their roster in this, cross-country affair for them early in the season. And Cronin already said it. This is a team that is not going to look sharp early. That's not his words, but the way he's making it seem building into the season is it's going to be a journey. They got their punch in the mouth against New Mexico. I don't like the shooting numbers from UCLA from 3. It doesn't help when you get an 0 for 6 from arguably one of the best shooters in the country last year, and he's hardly logging any minutes at this moment until game 3. And some of the paint presence is not there in the development from William Kyle yet in the Dymar, strength conditioning wise. And Cronin is going with what he believes to be reliable guys in the lineup with multiple minutes. Daly Jr., somebody who he believes can rebound, is uber athletic, and do multiple things. Same thing with Johnson. Bilodeau is just the best back to the basket, tough jump shot making guy, even though he only scored 6 points in this game. The same guy that just went for 20 plus and 15 boards against an extremely big New Mexico team, as he did his best to keep the Bruins barely in the game towards the end. UCLA is doing things with, hey, some of your best shooters haven't been shooting the ball well. There has been, 2 made threes from Sky Clark in the first couple of games, 0 from Dominic Harris. Dylan Andrews didn't really have a good stroke going. I did like Stefanovic with what he's done. Stefanovic has been shooting it lights out in limited opportunity. He is 3 of 5 tonight. So the Bruins have seen 1 3-point shooter do well, and that's Stefanovic in the first 3 games, who has had a very reduced role coming to the season, and he's thrived. And he came in the starting lineup, played 18 minutes, scored 13 points and 7 shots. Now, if the Bruins are able to get that production out of Stefanovic last year, that's one thing. But they needed him to shoot a bunch of shots and score a bunch of points, which wasn't exactly a role I think Cronin had designed for him. This type of 13 minutes from the starting lineup, just like that can be productive. Now, the Bruins aren't going to be tested until early December. I like the effort. I like the intensity. I do not like whatsoever UCLA's inability to execute or to shoot so far, because those were things you thought with a veteran point guard, multiple veteran guys, that you could hone in on and just play basketball and pummel these teams by 30 without just throwing the ball away. Well, when you deal with the portal, newcomers, everything, all those things have to click. And when it's an all-newcomer lineup of sorts for Cronin in this starting lineup, then there is still a bit to do. It's not like Boston shot well. They didn't hit a bunch of threes. They only went to the free throw line 9 times. They committed 28 turnovers. The Bruins scored 36 points off of turnovers. So in this game, UCLA scored more than half their points based off a Boston turnover. That means they're not really running a lot of offense. So we haven't seen complete, crisp sets from UCLA, and I hope they start to hone in on this as the season progresses. Nice win. It was expected, and it will be expected until the month of December when the Bruins start Big Ten play and then have the gauntlet of a 3-game and 3 games out of 4 stretch where they play Arizona, North Carolina, and Gonzaga. So until they get the Washington, Oregons on the schedule, this is kind of how I picture every game going. And hopefully they'll look a little cleaner. And then when they can get to games that hopefully won't be close until the early Decembers of the world, hopefully not until mid-December against Arizona, then they will be ready and play much better defense. But if a team's not bigger than UCLA, I don't see the Bruins truly struggling unless somebody goes lights out from 3. That is my perspective from these first 3 games. If you can't make UCLA pay in the paint or just overwhelm them with size and force terrible, terrible turnovers, then I think UCLA, even on a good night, even on a bad night, will just overwhelm a lot of these opponents early in the season. That's just the facts. And the true identity of this roster won't be formed until they get through December. Good things and bad things. Speaking of good things, the shorthanded UCLA women were able to come away with a win only by 18 against Colgate. Shocking that they weren't able to put away Colgate early in that game, but it took a spectacular effort from Lauren Betts. Talk about that next on the Locked On UCLA podcast. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, customers can bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live NFL bets all in one place, whether you get the hunch in the middle of the game. You can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Again, you can get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. One trip to Paris and the UCLA women have returned. Although, did they all? It didn't look like it when you looked at that starting lineup for Corey Close against Colgate. It was like, wait a minute. They're missing quite a few familiar faces in this starting lineup and to be playing at all, right? A lot of questions have been asked for Close. You got quite a few newcomers. And even more so, did UCLA have to lean on their freshmen and the newcoming players in this game against Colgate, where the Bruins were unable to truly put away this team like they would have liked, I think, early. Because there's only 2 more preparation games for UCLA, Pepperdine, and then you got the likes of Arkansas. And Arkansas was preseason predicted to be the bottom team in the SEC. So then you go from the bottom of the SEC to South Carolina in a week's time after that. And still, the Bruins are without Kiki Rice. And the way Close made it seem like in that post-game presser was that she's day to day, with the loud emphasis of day to day. I'm calling the trainer, trying to get her as ready as ever to play in a game, and she's just not been cleared with the shoulder that has kept her out of the first 2 games. Well, the Bruins handled the first test out of the country, literally on a neutral floor, against a scrappy Louisville team that I thought was a feisty battle for the Bruins. They handled that. And Colgate was something similar, a 2-1 team now out of the Patriot League. And UCLA got a lot out of, obviously, Lauren Betts. Betts had a career performance in 30 minutes, 15 of 18, could have had close to mid-30s in points if she made all their free throws. But almost a perfect day. A couple assists, 9 boards, couple blocks, 1 steal, and only 2 turnovers. She was as flawless as you could get on the offensive side. And yes, with some of these mid-major teams, Betts is already a size mismatch for teams in Big Ten play across the country in women's college basketball nationally. Then you put her in a game against Colgate, and you've got UCLA, who is playing without Kiki Rice, who is still waiting for Ledger Walker, I think, to get healthy after, her knee injury. Then you have Kiki battling and everything. You had no Dugalich in this lineup. UCLA had no Jaquez, who I think had an ankle injury. I'm not sure when exactly that happened, but she was held out of this game. So UCLA had 3 new-coming players in this starting lineup. That included Arnasalo, a freshman, Gardner, a transfer, and Dudley, a youngster. And they all played 20 or more minutes to get some cohesion together, which meant there was a lot of mistakes. If you watched a UCLA men's or women's game this year, you've unfortunately seen in 5 games total an astonishing amount of turnovers. The difference for the women, though, is that your starting guard, your starting point guard, and maybe your starting backup or another person who can handle the ball and Ledger Walker, they're both out hurt. So they are living and dying with a true freshman point guard, and London Jones, who Corey Close has said has been one of the most improved players in her locker room this season. And Jones isn't like a true point guard. All right. From what I've seen, she's not a true point guard. So she's somewhat playing, I think, in a role that's not the most familiar to her at UCLA. And when you see UCLA 17 turnovers, 10 of those have come from Arnasalo, who made 6 in 32 minutes, but 19 points on 80% shooting. And then 4 from Jones, who's normally a person who's not going to handle the ball as much as she would this year. But so far in the early going, she's being asked to do a lot. Played the most out of the UCLA players in the starting lineup. And then you see Betts, who had the ball in her hands probably the most as a post player. 12 of those 17 turnovers are players who have had the ball in their hands the most. You got Janiah Barker, who is super athletic, can truly handle the ball, but she had 3 turnovers. And so far is still learning, I think, the system in the first couple of games, but I really like her play. UCLA in this game, 7 of 17, didn't overwhelm teams from 3. They didn't overwhelm this Colgate team from downtown. But in this game, it looks like the numbers, which are a little off on the website that I'm looking at, they have the box score, and it's completely wrong. I think the final totals are correct. UCLA shot close to 60% from the game, over 40% from 3, while they didn't make 10 or more, and they didn't get to the free throw line all too often. Again, the 17 turnovers, the 20-plus turnovers against Louisville is not going to cut it. I just don't think it's a long-term solution with players who are being asked to play a lot of minutes early in roles that I think are foreign, right? Moving up from, international waters coming to the U.S. with Arnasalo, as much as the Bruins trust her and given her the reins to play. UCLA had Kendall Dudley get a lot of minutes, 22. Those are a lot of newcomers, right? Those are 15 minutes or 10 minutes they're going to Dugalich. You had Jaquez, who had finally worked in her junior year to get to a starting lineup role, who'd play 20 or more minutes. That might go to Dudley or so a couple to Gardner, right? And then you're missing Kiki Rice, who's playing 35 minutes a game, right? 30 to 35. And is the floor general, averaging double figures, can average close to 6-7 assists, get a few rebounds, and can completely change the game when she is on the court for UCLA. So I think it's been impressive that the Bruins have been able to score a bunch of points, survive a Louisville test, put up 81 at home, survive the jet lag, and you have 3 to 4 starting capable players on your roster that did not play in this game, and they still put up 81 points. Now, the question is, can they all be healthy by the time they play to South Carolina? And I know Corey Close will say post-game and say, hey, yes, I want to install the culture, instill the principles that we need to play here with UCLA, but to beat the best teams in the country, whether you're using South Carolina as a tune-up for later in the Big Ten season when you face off then against Juju Watkins and USC a couple of times, you've got some very tough opponents coming up in non-conference neutral site tilts later right on the East Coast, one in San Francisco later in the year, hosting South Carolina. You want your best there so they can be tried and tested together as a complete roster, as complete as it can be when it comes to full health. All right? I'm wondering when that will be, and that hasn't been a clear thing so far in the first couple of games. For the Bruins, the more they win, a top 5 team, that's good enough for Corey Close. Now, they should be peppered on pretty easily. I'm wondering what Arkansas will pose. As I already said, they're preseason predicted to finish last in the SEC. And then the real test begins November 24th. You got South Carolina coming to your gym. And if you're going to sell out Pauley Pavilion, you better bring the best. If they're healthy enough, they can certainly compete. But the way they've been playing, turning over the ball, is not going to win a game against South Carolina, regular season at home or a neutral site in the tournament. It's just not. Now they're growing, and I'm proud of how they've played so far, looking at different players being asked to do more than they probably would have been in a late season game or at some points in their career. And they're filling it just nicely. And if you want to learn the new Bruins names, you're learning them pretty quickly because a lot of them played in this game. Next, let's take a look at, the Bruins moved to the Big Ten in nearly every sport possible. How are some of these fall teams heading to the postseason going so far, namely the two soccer teams, men's and women's? Talk about that next on the Locked On UCLA podcast. All right, you're sitting there. It's a late weeknight game. And you're like, man, what can I do? Am I going to support the Bruins? Well, go check out GameTime, all right? GameTime Picks helps make getting tickets for all your favorite teams and favorite events even easier because it filters out the fluff to get incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets, all right? This is what you can do with GameTime. All-in pricing, toggle the feature, and then you'll see the pricing up front. You don't have to wait and be like, hey, how far can I go in the process without hitting pay before I know how much you pay? No, GameTime, you toggle on the feature, you know what you're paying. And your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime Picks. Download the app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, Locked On College for $20 off. Download GameTime today. What time is it? It's game time. Cruising on into the final segment of Locked On UCLA. Zach with you guys. Again, this is what the Bruins are going to deal with in the current iteration of their conference affiliation. Unintentional rhymes, but I do them all the times. The Bruins are in the Big Ten. Women's volleyball, that season's still going until December, so we're not going to talk about them at this juncture. The two big seasons that have finished right now have been the men's and women's soccer season, all right? For the women's soccer, UCLA 2 years removed from a national championship. Last year, they were stunningly forced out to end their NCAA tournament run at the hands of UC Irvine for the second time in 3 years. In the middle one of those, they won a national championship. They finished the regular season 16-3-3, 8-1-2 in Big Ten conference play, unbeaten at home, ironically unbeaten in neutral site games, and 7-3-1 on the road, with a lot of travel in between. Let's remind you what this UCLA women's team has had to do this year for a team that's expected to compete in Margaret Awazasa's third year now. UCLA, after a lot of local games, their earliest travel they did in August was to San Luis Obispo. They finally traveled in September on a winless trip to Knoxville and Lexington, scoring 0 goals in the process against the Vols and against Kentucky. Then they followed that up with a win against Eugene. They played in Bloomington. They played in West Lafayette. So again, they have 5 consecutive road games in September. UCLA went from playing a home game in August, and then they went to Malibu. So they went from August 28th and didn't return home until September 26th. In between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 road games where UCLA was shut out 3 times and only scored, 5 goals in 6 games? Tells you the toughness of the opponents they're playing or just the travel schedule, how that makes an effect. Now, remember, UCLA battled through this schedule, went to Illinois again against Northwestern, Illinois. They come back, and at the end of the season, their road game at the Dignity Health Sports Park, they played on the main field where the Galaxy play a heartbreak against USC in the Big Ten regular championship game unofficially, where the Trojans won that regular season crown. Now, they go back, they go to Minnesota, and they go play a very different schedule, right? They go across the country to the Midwest. They beat Penn State 1-0. Then you face Washington, where normally this Big Ten tournament, this conference tournament, that has never happened in the Pac-12. they would go regular season and take it to the final day. But no, they get a Big Ten conference tournament. The Bruins shut out the Huskies. Then it gets Rutgers with a team that slowly, like UCLA, getting healthier and healthier. In the Big Ten tournament championship, spanked the Scarlet Knights, literally 5-0, blitzed them. And in the tournament, UCLA outscored opponents 8-0 en route to a Big Ten tournament crown. UCLA gets a 2 seed, so they'll be able to host the majority of their games until they get to a college cup potentially. They play CBU on Friday. Now, if the Bruins can get out of this is the question, right? Soccer is that funky sport where if UCLA can literally get out of the first round, they could easily go all the way with a defensive stand, some pieces slowly coming into form for this UCLA team who I saw in person, but they didn't have Sunshine playing. They didn't have quite a few players playing against Long Beach in that season opener, and they still looked pretty dominant and a strong defensive play, winning 3-0 in their season opener. Now, they went from second place in the Big Ten regular season, Big Ten regular season champs, and for all the talk about travel, you saw in that middle, you listened or you heard me talk about in that middle part of the season, in September, they went on 6 straight road games just to kind of prepare themselves. It seemed like with this schedule, some quirky scheduling just with, road game against Pepperdine and then going across the country with Big Ten games right after those tough East Coast games. I think they're prepared. Now, for the tournament, they really don't have to go far if things break their way. And as a 2 seed, you handled CBU in an unofficial, basically 2 versus 15 battle. Last year, UCLA was shocked against Irvine. Now, I haven't done full sets of research for the Lancers, but as long as the Bruins just don't get down and don't have 20 shots on goal and get beat down by the soccer gods where they just lose heartbreakingly 1-0 or something in the first round and go to PKs 0-0, then I think UCLA can be fine and handle their way into a potential College Cup appearance and battle for the national crown this year. Now, there's a lot to be made for the Bruins, but in tournament play, you clutch up. That is probably the best. Now, we talk about Big Ten. They go through, win a conference championship, dominate, literally dominate all their way through. Probably their toughest game last played was October 27th against USC. Now let's take a look at the men, all right? Let's talk about the men's soccer team who went through a pretty interesting travel schedule as well. They started off with an exhibition at CSUN. The UCLA men did not hit the road for the first time until September 13th. So the men's season does start a little later, but they went from, 1 to about 4 home games, scrapping and clawing their way through, and then lost to Wisconsin on the road, tied Michigan 3-3. So they scored a lot of goals, but got scored a lot on, right? The women's problem was they couldn't score on the road, at least in those middle games. UCLA's early games against these Big Ten ranked opponents, they gave up 7 goals in a 2-game stretch in their first 2 or 3 games going on the road and then coming back to Wallace-Annenberg against Michigan. UCLA scrapped and clawed, beat a number 2 Ohio State team at the time 2-1, beat Rutgers, fought through games in Maryland, had to go to New Jersey, right? This is sounding like UCLA's football schedule at this point, and ended the season with a regular season loss to Washington. Now, the Big Ten tournament, a little bit smaller. The UCLA men went to playing Maryland and made it to the Big Ten championship where they played Michigan and lost on PKs in a heartbreaking finale, right? They were battling in the Big Ten championships and found themselves just a little short. So in the Big Ten tournament championships, UCLA advanced around, dominated, fell short in PKs with a chance to get to the championship game against Ohio State. They fell a little bit short against Michigan in the semis, which is going to take place later this week. And they'll release the brackets for the men's a little bit later. So we'll see how the UCLA Bruins fare for their postseason eligibility and postseason berth. And I wonder what these super conferences are going to help or hurt UCLA in these sports. But here we are. The men's team, get a win in the tournament. They lose in PKs. They had a lot of chances for top 25 to boost their RPI. And I wonder how that's going to help their resume going into an NCAA tournament. Because in soccer, they kind of build their tournament cases based off regions, right? Who's the best in the West, Midwest, South, East, right? That's how the soccer's are ranked a little bit different than most. The soccer and then the coaches poll, the U.S. soccer's poll, they can vary between some of these polls. RPI is a big thing, but the UCLA Bruins should have a big-time RPI. I just wonder if the record will suffice to sneak in. All right, I have to look a little more into that. But you had the women's team who won the Big Ten tournament, going in as a 2 seed. And you got the men's team who was this close to making it to a Big Ten tournament championship game in their first ever season. That tells you a lot about what the Bruins have done in the fall. So they withstood the travel, went on one more trip, and the Bruins were able to handle things. Now we'll see how these sports do it, like the men's, the women's basketball. There's going to be a lot more travel, a lot more games, and then a big tournament, and then another big tournament. And then you've got football finishing up, who is on a red-hot streak. Red-hot streak. And we're going to talk about them in the next episode of Locked On UCLA, about Deshaun Foster getting his due and the Bruins turning things around with, an easier schedule than a brutal middle of the season 4-game stretch. Dare I say 5-game stretch, right? 4 games, 5 games. They have turned things around. We'll talk about that in the next Locked On UCLA episode. For now, let's get your hands up, Bruins fans. 8 clap time, baby. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA. UCLA. Fight, fight, fight. This has been Locked On UCLA. Like, comment, subscribe, download. Tell me your thoughts. Thanks for your support. This is Zach signing off. Go Bruins.